Hi, I'm Kishshana Palmer, CEO and founder of Kishshana & Co. I'm a coach, a facilitator, and a trainer, and I help career professionals and entrepreneurs like you grow. Grow your skills, grow your teams, and grow your revenue. Welcome to the Secret Lives of Leaders. So, I want to welcome everyone to the Secret Lives of Leaders. I am Kishshana Palmer, CEO and founder of Kishshana & Co., where I help career professionals and entrepreneurs grow their people, grow their skills, and do all of that without flipping tables and without losing their sanity. And so today I am so excited to have my friend, Chris Conroy of Conroy Talent Associates on the video chat with me. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Kish, what's up?
So, listen, y'all.
Morning.
Good morning. So, anybody who knows me, if you've seen me, you've hung out with me, you've watched my videos, you know I'm a little bit irreverent, and but we know our stuff, you see. And so I figured that I would invite one of the beasts, the stalwarts, as it was, the minds of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our space onto the video chat with me so he and I can hang out. He is my thought partner. We talk every week. We hold each other accountable. We help each other's businesses grow. We help each other personally. And that's actually a really hard thing to find in business. And so to be able to have authentic connections and to encourage all of you who are going to be watching this to do so with your colleagues is something that Chris and I are really into. And so I'm so honored to have you here to hang out with me today.
Same here.
All right. So, Chris, how'd we meet?
How did we meet? We met via, how did we meet, Kish? We met via, did I contact you?
I think you contacted me. Look, you know, y'all, we're supposed to have our stories together. We don't ever have these stories together.
We don't have our stories together at all.
We just appeared, okay?
So wait, my story, my side of the story, I feel like an accomplice now. I feel like I'm being interrogated. No, I'm playing. We met through LinkedIn, right?
It was LinkedIn.
We did meet through LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yes. Ha-ha.
Yep.
You guys, actually am walking my talk, okay? Yes. LinkedIn. Go ahead. Do you remember how? Because I remember how now.
I don't remember how, but I remember we set up a phone call.
Yes.
After, however that initial conversation happened, we set up a phone call. And I remember I was calling you while I was running in between buildings and appointments, and we just sat down and had a conversation about all the different ways that our backgrounds were connected. I think in particular in the nonprofit sector here in Boston.
Yeah.
On that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sexier version, you guys, is
right, there we go.
Chris wrote a very provocative article about being an ally in the time of real racial tension and stress, and how to do that on Monday when you go back to work, when there's been some craziness, of which at that time and every day, there's so much stuff happening in our sort of like personal, professional, political landscape. And so the article was so well done and so thoughtful and so, like, in my mind, I was like, "Ooh, this is radical. Oh, wow. This is a white man." And he's like, "Let me tell y'all about all of yourselves, okay? And let me give you the research to back it, just in case you were wondering." And I just had to reach out and say, "Can we be friends?" And that's so right. Then we got on the phone. Yeah.
There we go.
I like my story better. I just want you
your story is far better. Let's just leave that one in. We could edit all my
no, it all has to stay. The people need to know. You're like, it was a rainy day. No.
But yeah, that was right after the weekend after Charlottesville when that happened. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Really powerful article you wrote, and I want to see more because your writing is spectacular.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely want to see more. So, tell me, when after our first conversation, Chris, you know that we went together? Because I sort of see you as like my consultant husband. You know, I know your wife is thebomb.com.
Yes.
But I sort of like inherited you. He's mine at work. No one else can have him. Okay, thanks. So when did you know that, like, all right, she's cool. This is my peeps?
I think it was pretty much from the first conversation. I think one of the things I first remember about our initial conversation was that you were very much down to earth, and we were both very, I think, revealed at least a little bit of vulnerability about
Yes.
the crazy days we were having. Whether it was me running and being behind on several different appointments, or whether it was you talking about all the work that you were doing. I think you were preparing for a presentation, as
Yeah.
you often are. But I think we were both not uncomfortable to talk about how harried we were in that moment and how we needed to do better. I think that vulnerability is a good way to create immediate trust between people. So I think that was the thing that set it off.
And it's so funny because I feel like at this point in our careers, and particularly as consultants, you need like vulnerability, and yet you sort of inculcate yourself from that the
Mhm.
very thing that you need to be able to make connections, because people aren't supposed to know, right?
Right,
Like things are
right,
not quite right every day,
right.
so definitely was an important that's important to note, and that's important for folks to know, like it's actually okay to put yourself out there. Like you'd be amazed at the connection you make, and frankly, you guys, like making friends and professional friends at that, colleagues, is really hard as an adult. We kind of suck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
He's like, nope. No. So,
Yep.
Chris, tell me, what do you do? Like, well, I think you do amazing work, and it's so dope and complex, but I would love for you to share what you do, why you're so excited about what you do.
Sure. So I play two roles. The first is that I'm principally a recruiter. So I help people get jobs, and I help companies that want to find great people get great talent into their organizations. And then the second thing that I do is that the way I would describe it is that I'm a cultural facilitator. So I help organizations and companies really figure out what's the kind of culture, what's the kind of community that we want to build. What are the values that we want to have? What are the principles and the ways that we want to operate?
Mhm.
And then how do we want people to feel at the end of the day when they walk out the door and go live the rest of their lives? And so we've been doing that for the last 4 years, and I really enjoy that process.
Awesome. And tell me about that, like about
Mhm.
what people feel when they're leaving to go home for the day. Like, why is that so important to like the values of your firm? Because I know that's something you
Right.
talk about all the time, and people need to know why it's so critical.
Well, I think it's primarily because I think that we have this impression, at least in the United States, I think we have this impression that we are different people in and outside of work, like that we like walk in the threshold of the door or slide wherever we're at our office building. Yes. And all of a sudden we become professional Chris and professional Kishshana.
Yeah.
And like there's, now we've completely changed, and none of the stuff that we carry with us, or none of the biases, or none of the emotional baggage that we bring with us, or communication styles or personalities that we bring with us actually affect that world, when in fact they are the core drivers for how we treat each other in the
Oh,
workplace, and actually how we actually get work done. And so that's not often explored. We kind of pretend like that's not there, and we set up
exactly.
systems to pretend it's not there.
Exactly. You're like, don't look. Don't
Right.
look.
Take
Right.
that to HR. Take that.
Right. Write a
So,
memo.
uh, but and my wife is an HR professional, so she's the one that gets all that stuff.
Ooh, how does that happen at home? I'm curious. Ooh, look, y'all, we getting in this business. So, does your wife HR you?
No, she does not, because she doesn't want to do it at the end of the day. So she's not interested. She's holding too many other people's stuff. So yeah, no, I think that's one of the things, right? Is we go home at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and we show up at the beginning of the day carrying stuff, and that really affects the way that we work with our teams, the way that we work with our direct reports, with our supervisors, with everybody, with our customers, and with our clients. And I think those are the things that we haven't looked hard enough about, like how our individual ways of being affect our overall company culture. And so that's the stuff that I'm really interested in.
And excited about. Okay.
Yeah.
And darn good at. Hello.
Thank you.
What are the types of
Mhm.
organizations, and because you do nonprofit, social sector, and for profit,
Yeah.
so what are the types of companies and organizations that you are most jazzed to work with?
Everybody. But
He's
so I
the
started
Costco
off.
working together, okay? No. No, he's really not. He's really, it's like the Lamborghini, maybe with Costco like Wednesdays. Okay, no, I don't know. We're gonna figure this analogy out. Okay, go ahead. No, go.
So I started my career in education. So
Okay.
I was a special education teacher in Boston for the first 6 years of my career, and the initial way that I started to notice how organizational culture plays out in getting results for the organization that you're in is I just noticed the difference between the two schools that I was in initially. The first school that I was in was under resourced. It was kind of like on that bad list. I don't know if
Yes.
the way that the federal government and state governments rank schools in terms of providing funding, et cetera, and putting them on lists so that are basically indicators of whether they will be closed in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
That was initially the first kind of school that I was in. It did end up closing, and it was a really high pressure environment where there were tons of adults that were feeling under resourced, underpaid, expected to do the impossible, were trying to support their students, but at the same time being, you know, just forced to try and bring up test scores any way possible. And then I left that building and went into a new school, which was more effectively resourced. I wouldn't say it was rich in resources, but it had the resources it needed to support its students. They had a philosophy where it wasn't you were in your, you go to your classroom and you figure out how to deal with your kids. It was all of our students through all grade levels are all of our students together. And we all worked with each other to figure out, you could go to any colleague at any time of the day, and they would step out of their classroom or they would connect with you in a one-on-one meeting to talk about how to support one another in the work that you do. And that kind of environment then filtered down to the kids, filtered down to the young adults that were in the classroom.
Okay.
And I thought, and it was interesting because the first school that I taught at was a middle school in Boston, and the second school I taught at was a high school. And you ended up having students that graduated the middle school and went into the high school that I was teaching at. So they followed me, or I followed them, or however you want to describe it. But it's the same students, and we got dramatically different results with the same students and the same families, same neighborhoods, et cetera. And it really came down to how do the adults in the building treat each other? What's the culture of the place? How do we support one another? And it doesn't just come down to resources, but it's about the choices we make in treating each other. And so I couldn't figure out why I couldn't put a name on it, but it kind of sparked my interest in understanding how that process happens. And so I started studying organizational design and development, and that led me to this field.
So good. And I love that you have that like practitioner story that's so rooted in the work you do, because ultimately you are approaching it with a beginner's mind. I imagine that you're constantly thinking about those young people that you spend so much time with, and how transformative a different environment with different adults who wanted to work together differently treated each other, and how impactful that is, and how that resonates in so many different organizations you work with now. If the adults can get our lives together. Okay, as Kishshana would say.
And we're not talking about, I think a lot of times, a lot of assumptions that people have about organizations that are functioning well or functioning not well is that there's just incompetent people in one environment and competent people in another. And that's not true at all. The school that I was teaching in at the time, one of the best teachers in that environment, who's phenomenal, Jessica Tang, she is now the president of the Boston Teachers Union. Right. So, and she was incredibly, and is still very incredibly competent. She's an incredible educator and cares a ton about the young adults that she works with. But the environment itself, right, no matter how good you are at your job, and you know this as well too from your own experiences, I'm sure, but no matter how effective you are as an individual, if the environment's not right, the work product's not going to be right.
It's not going to be right. That's exactly right. And that just really goes to show you how, when you think about culture, we use thoughts like cultural fit, which is let's not get into the bias thing yet. But we think about the actual like cultural ethos of an organization or a company, and how that like permeates into how you perform, what the expectations are, what your pathway to success is, how you show up every day. Like those things matter, and yet oftentimes retreats, shoop, first thing to go. Professional development trainings, out the door. You're like, read it online for free. Like the expectation to perform at such a high level, regardless of what organization or company you're in, without being resourced to kind of keep filling yourself, so that you're able to work within that environment, and that the environment itself is healthy and being fed. I think is super important. And so I know the work you do just directly impacts that every day.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the folks are lucky to have you. Okay. Let me just say, lucky y'all. Okay. Thank you. So what is your biggest pet peeve in business right now, or in the sector? Like, what's really got your blood just boiling?
It's not, it takes a lot to get my blood boiling, but I'd say lack of transparency. So
okay.
I think, and I understand that there's in different industries and different sectors, there's legal ramifications for certain aspects of data privacy and things of that nature. However, when I say lack of transparency, I don't mean opening the door to the treasure trove of your competitive intellectual property, but what I mean is lack of transparency around the processes and the principles for how we make decisions in organizations. And I think there's a tremendous amount of anyone who's on the front line in their field who will be able to tell you if they're an individual contributor, if they're if they're a customer service agent, right? That the extent that their effectiveness and their ability to enjoy their job and be able to meet the needs of their customers is truly dependent upon their ability to have a transparent environment where they can interact and provide quick feedback to their senior management, those around themselves, and the fact that they can be heard and feel like their experience in the workplace is something that not just they have to deal with, but that the other folks who are in their organization, particularly senior management, that those are folks that are listening and have an ear out for it and want to know what that experience is like, and then want to take action if it's not effective. Not just because it's important for the people who are doing that job, but because it's actually the beneficial thing to do for the company. So you've seen that in places like with the success of Zappos and Tony Hsieh and others, right? There are these companies, these 21st century companies, right, that are succeeding primarily because of not despite, but because of their transparency and their communication structures inside of their organization.
And what do you think prevents companies and organizations from pursuing transparency? Because I feel like transparency and all the principles that go with it is an intention, right? Like it's a decision. And everything you do, all your practices, your policies, your processes have to support your decision to follow transparency. What do you think is holding folks back?
Fear.
Yes, come on. Fear is the root of all things. Let me just tell you. Fear will get you, okay?
Yeah. I think it's fear. I think it's the fear of how, if you are a quote unquote decision maker in your organization, that title, right, or that your knowledge of that can generate a lot of fear if you're significantly concerned about the perception that other people will have about your decision. And so we create kind of PR campaigns, and we create kind of euphemisms for why we make decisions, or we keep processes kind of opaque or kind of behind closed doors, primarily because I think we're afraid of what the larger perception of our overall workforce will be if we tell the truth, or we publicize, or if we get additional input on how the decision is going to be made.
Absolutely. And do you feel like that's where the sort of some of the hard work is? That's where you kind of get in and you work with your clients to help them sort of unpack that and figure out strategies, to be able to make that happen.
Yes, that is where the hard work happens, because I think one of the things about hierarchy, right, if you talk about organizations and the way that they're structured, is that old, like kind of the old school organizational structure lends itself to, in terms of, we talk about like, say, command and control models of management, right? Where you kind of have that pyramid and that organization chart.
Yes.
They lend themselves very well, not necessarily to transparency, but to speed, right? So the speed of getting complex tasks done, we're going to put everybody in their box, everybody in their role, and we're going to make sure everybody follows the script at each level, right? And if we have to change, we're going to change everything at the top, at the strategy standpoint, where all the senior people are, all the executives are, because they've somehow earned the right to make the decision about how to handle that complexity. And then we're going to get everybody to fall in line again with that change. That appears to lend itself to speed and efficiency in some ways, right? So I would say, in the 1920s, when my great grandfather was drilling rivets into the side of a ship in the Quincy shipyard here in Boston, and he was on a team of 4 people, and they needed to produce 80 rivets per hour instead of 70. You could have your supervisor tell them, hey, we need to make this change in order for you to get 80 rivets out of this next hour, right? And that's the kind of problem you might have been dealing with in that kind of industry. The problem is that that is not the way our economy is shaped anymore. Our economy is not shaped for like these kind of mechanistic tasks and these kind of successful tasks anymore, because number one, they're going to be automated, right? And number two, the pace of change in the economy and in the competitiveness of our industries is changing so much that we need workers to be far more flexible in terms of being able to develop solutions, and our companies to be a lot more flexible. The problem with that is that you can't use a command and control model to navigate that. And it's not faster. It's no longer faster in order to be able to do that. And so we have this real friction between management being trained in one particular way of developing communications and developing processes to solve for problems or to solve for innovation in their sector. But then you also have this other set of challenges that you run up against, which are not sequential, they're complex, they're very dynamic. And so what it takes is it takes a real belief that the folks who are on the front line dealing with that complexity on a day-to-day basis can actually help you make those decisions.
Absolutely.
And that takes a whole nother set of processes. It takes another way to structure your organization. We have to structure our organizations differently, and we have to communicate differently with one another as well too.
Absolutely. That is so good. And that's what makes the work that you do to me so awesome, because that's a lot of nuance. And it's heavy enough that to the person who's like not ready for this work, they'll be like, all right, forget it. I quit. You just look, let me go. It's just,
Yeah, you're like the first person this week whose eyes didn't glaze over when I got to the middle of that. I'm playing.
And I love it. Listen, folks, if you have hung in with Chris and I this long, I hope you have some notes. And Chris, as a matter of fact, I'm going to put at the top of the note, like when I put this up, to say, get your pens and your papers out, because it's out here preaching. Okay, like it is really good. Like that makes total sense to me, and it just really speaks to that, there are lots of folks who do the type of work you do in some way, shape, or form. There's space at the table for lots of different types of philosophies and for lots of different types of practitioners. But I just love that you just bring in the people-driven dynamic into the way you're solving business and organizational challenges, and that stays at the heart, what people understand, what they believe, what they're willing to act on in order to be able to drive change, decision making, busting open the status quo, being able to be introspective organizationally and then professionally. Like that's phenomenal to me. So I'm just like all in love with that. Cool. So what do you think is one thing you think leaders today should talk about more that we are not talking about?
Our vulnerabilities.
Say more. Oh, I want to know. I'm like, where's my popcorn? I need to get it.
I think that the rate of change that happens in our organizations is so quick, and we're facing such, I think, big challenges in all areas of our economy and our social life nowadays, that I think to walk around, like we said at the top of the show, I think like we talked about the fact that what drew us into a partnership was, I think, myself recognizing in you that you were willing very much upfront to be like, hey, I don't have it all together. I don't have all the answers. And that attitude, I think, is so invaluable in this day and age in terms of being able to succeed. So I think being able to talk about how you fail makes it far more likely that you're going to be able to succeed in this kind of environment, in the kind of world that we live in today. And so, I think this is something that we don't teach in our schools. Like, we don't teach kids that it's okay to fail all the time. There's tons of fantastic teachers and educators and schools out there that do that work. It's just hard to communicate that message when you have things like high stakes testing, or when you have very kind of hierarchical processes where there's really high stakes for how well you perform in a particular test, et cetera. Like those kinds of ways of sorting people and thinking about human potential are completely outmoded at this point. And so I think one of the ways that we need to be able to deal as leaders with that kind of environment is to just be open about what we can do really well and what we are not doing well. I think doubling down on your strengths is a good thing. I think you can't always delegate out your mistakes.
No, you cannot.
I can't.
That's a word. Like, you can't delegate your mistakes. Okay, that is awesome. I'll be like, that's going to be one of my quotes in my delegation course.
Right. So, for instance, I'll make this like kind of simple. So, my wife and I, you can think of a household like a business in many ways too, or because it is an economic unit. Yeah. But my wife and I, when we want to save for a house, which we are right now, one of the things we need to be able to do is to save X amount of dollars monthly, which means we need to cook our food rather than actually buying it out. And so that means that one of us needs to cook. And that means I'm the cook because I'm home earlier. That means I'm cooking. Now, just because it's not my strength, right? It's not like my natural strength, doesn't mean that for the purpose of our unit that I don't chip in and actually do the best I can to do an effective job there, right? Like the reality is that all of our organizations, all of our companies have limitations to them, and that we're going to be put in a position at times where, yes, we're going to focus on our strengths and go in that area, but we're going to have to actually do work where we don't love it, where it's not something that we're super proficient at or feel like that we're super talented at, or get a bunch of fulfillment from. And the goal is to figure out either A, how do we position people to do that work? And if we can't position somebody into that role and I have to take it on, how can I do that? And how can I survive that process in a way where I don't feel alone in that process, right? Like, how can I work with my teammates to figure out, what can I improve on and how to quickly iterate on that improvement without there being
judgment.
Right. I think that's
Isn't that it?
The nail on the head. And I don't think annual performance reviews are going to do that for us.
Oh, no.
So we really need to change from a leadership perspective. We need to change that for us. So we need to be able to talk openly about, on a day-to-day basis, about what's going well and what's not. And that requires us being vulnerable.
Absolutely. And, I think if you didn't get anything else, vulnerability is one of the secret things that leaders just don't want to do. We are scared to death of letting people see all of our business. I call it my wiggly bits. Okay. I posted on Facebook the other day that, I'm a solo mama.
Yep.
And I am 2 years into my consulting practice full time. I'm out of industry for now. And some days between my preteen, who's just makes me just
I'm with you. I
understand. No words. But parents, godparents, aunties who are involved, uncles, okay, y'all understand what I'm saying. You see this? Right? Between sometimes clients who make me feel that way at home too. And just like the life of just putting all this stuff together and managing it, whether you
Mm,
are in a partnership or on your own or working for a firm or working by yourself. Like
mm.
sometimes I'm just trying to keep my blood pressure low, you know?
Yep.
And that's it. Okay. And being able to say that out loud, it took me, I'll 2 years. My anniversary is it March yet? Next month. It was
Mhm.
2 years in March. And it took me a year and 11 months to say out loud, like for real, like sometimes I'm drowning,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
and to do that. And so I think that is dead on. And if you are not taking Chris's advice for this particular point, I'm giving you the side eye. You see me, y'all? Because it's so important. So if anything, what's keeping you up at night right now? Like what's like,
What's keeping me up at night? So I go to sleep when I go to sleep. I have to be. I gotta be honest. My wife's like,
like that damn thing.
she's like, I'm really jealous of you because you fall asleep in like 10 seconds. So uh,
Yeah.
I'm very comfortable with sleeping. There's some vulnerability for you.
Yeah.
I will sleep in a second. You'll have me on here for the next conversation. I'll be
You be like, I was out for a minute, okay? It's okay.
like, so I sleep well.
What's your trick for doing that? Because I think lots of leaders,
Yeah.
myself included, my sleep is the first thing to go. So
Yep.
like it'll, and my mind is just doing it. So what's your tips
Yeah.
for leaders to rest better and to be able to do like how you're able to do and just turn it off so that you can give your body time to rejuvenate and recharge?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the research and the studies around sleep, and there's some great books. Sean Stevenson and Ariana Huffington have written a couple different books on sleep lately, which I definitely recommend. But it's literally the gateway to a healthy, long life, right? And
Yes.
so, I mean, if there's anything that actually, quote unquote, keeps me up at night, it's the future of my kids and my family, right? So like I'm super concerned about that, like those 5 people in my life. And so I want to make sure that those outcomes are great. And you just can't do that if you aren't all there, right?
That's right.
Right. And it's often the first thing that people say, well, it's the first thing to go. It's the first thing to sacrifice. And I think it means it's that much more important to really commit to it.
Yeah.
Cause that's how they get you, man.
That's how it is. I always say my first year on my own full time, I had the flu twice,
Yeah.
bronchitis twice. I was like, I didn't understand. I also watched all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. I just want to say for the record, everyone, I caught up in one flu. Okay. I didn't sleep at all, but it's okay. But to your point, like, I think
Yeah.
that has made a world of difference to be able
Mhm.
to say, like, I have got to be able to rest in order to be able to go full steam ahead.
Yep.
And so I think that's something that's really important for leaders who feel like they say things like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Actually, you're just dead when you're dead.
Right.
So maybe you should sleep now.
Yep.
For a long life, to your point. So I think that's an awesome one. Okay.
Okay.
You have a secret talent.
I saw this one. I got so nervous. I literally don't have a secret talent at all. I can't dance. No. So I love to write, clearly, but it's not so secret because that's how we met, right? So I love to write when I have the chance. So I do write a little fiction here, a little poetry there.
Ooh, oh,
Yeah. So that's
Renaissance man, as it were.
but that's about it. That's all I got though.
Okay.
I'm a really good parallel parker. That's another
First
thing.
of all, that is a talent, okay?
Right.
To go to Boston for school, if you grew up in New York City like I did and you learned to drive in New York City, you better learn how to left parallel park.
Yes.
Okay, that is a fact. Okay, all of this. I came to Boston and I said, what in the hippie breezy? It's happening with folks who can't park.
Yep.
So the fact that you know how to do that is actually a skill. You course on that, I'm just saying. So that is it. That's your secret talent. You can park the hell of it.
That's all I got.
I love it. Okay, and then last but not least, before we jump off, what are you working on now that you want folks who have hung out with us for this entire time? And thank you everybody for hanging out with us chat. What are you working on right now?
I'm working on trying to figure out how to help organizations take what they believe are the core competencies of the individual jobs that they hire for, right? So for instance, if you think of the core competencies of being anything, right? How do you match that up with the way that you interview people? Because our interview systems are broken. And we do not do a good job figuring out if the first thing you want to do in building a great team is know that you have a phenomenal team. And I think 90% of people think their teams are like phenomenal, but they're not.
Yes. Really?
Then you have to figure out how to match the questions you ask people to the competencies that you really want them to be able to demonstrate.
Yeah.
And that's really important for ensuring that we have inclusive and diverse organizations where bias doesn't take over in the interview process, and that we're hiring really phenomenal people. And so that's what I'm focused on.
I love that. Listen, you guys, Chris is going to be joining me on stage in April in New Orleans at the Association for Fundraising Professionals International Conference. We are taking the stage. We are going to have, the view, the chats,
yes,
the talk, the real style conversation about what it really takes to recruit, to hire, and to retain diverse professionals in the social sector. And so everything that Chris is talking about, we are going to break it down for you guys. You do not want to miss this. It's going to be amazing. Check out Chris on his website. Chris, what's your website?
ChrisConroy.site.
Come on, it's that easy. Hey, I'm Kishshana Palmer. You can check me out at www.kishshanaco, KISHSHANACO.com. I am hanging out with one of my favorite people in the whole world, Chris Conroy of Conroy Talent Associates. And this was our first episode of The Secret Lives of Leaders. We want to thank you.
The first episode?
This is it, bro.
Wow.
He's my guinea pig.
Yeah, I have to sit up straight. Hold on.
Yeah, he's like, oh, hell. He's like, I quit. The mic goes down. No. So thank you to everybody who's hung out with us. Please look Chris up. He is amazing. His team is amazing. The work he has done in Boston and across the country is absolutely phenomenal, game-changing. As you can tell with him, research back. Practitioner lives.
Yes.
And so you do not want to miss an opportunity to be able to work with him and with his team. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kish.
Amazing.